Recently, I had the pleasure of interviewing award-winning poet and writer, psychiatrist and critic, Dami Ajayi. In this interview, I asked him about 3 of his major works, 3 collections of poems, those being Clinical Blues, A Woman's Body is a Country, and Affection and Other Accidents. I also asked Dami a little bit about his upbringing growing up in Nigeria in the 90s, his work as a psychiatrist, his vulnerability in his writing, but also the different challenges he's faced along the way as an up-and-coming writer. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy the interview. Thank you very much. Welcome to Student Hours. Joining me today, Dami Ajayi. How are you doing today, Dami?
Very good, Jack. Lovely to see you.
Very glad to be here. Now today we're going to be speaking a lot about your work, in particular these 3 great pieces of work here. But before we delve into your work, I want to know a bit more about yourself. So I was wondering if you could please tell us a bit about yourself and about your background.
Okay, I'm very happy to tell you about that. So name is Dami Ajayi. Dami is short for Oluwadamilola, named by my uncle. Maybe that was a bit too personal. Yeah, I was born in Nigeria actually. Interestingly, incidentally, my parents come from the same town.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so which is very interesting, and they may actually be like very distant cousins. Very, very distant cousins. But distant enough to be allowed to marry.
Right.
So yeah, from that town, it's a nodal town because it's surrounded by quite a number of states. So there are like 3 states, and this town sits in the middle of it. It was popular in the 50s. Because it was a town where people would stop to eat, so they made good food, and so I probably make good food as well. I don't know if you'll be trying that out.
We should hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see how it goes.
So it was known for that at the time, and there's petroglyphs, like it's actually an heritage site. My village, Ibaroke, in Nigeria. I grew up in Lagos, which is the capital city. Not the capital city, the economic capital city. Was once the capital city, but now that is seated out of Abuja.
Oh, okay.
So grew up in Lagos. I went to technically private schools, but it wasn't a university. So the University of Lagos. So I went to staff school, which is a primary school. I went to the international school, which is a secondary school. But I didn't do the university there because I thought I had enough of that. So I went to Ife, the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife. Now, Obafemi Awolowo is or was a political figure in Nigeria who died in like 1987. But he was one of those who fought for the independence, and he was quite an important figure. Some people would say a figure of Yoruba nationalism now as well. So the school was named after him, but the school was built out of cocoa money. So cash crops like cocoa was quite popular in Nigeria then. So it was built from that, and I studied medicine there. Another thing to say about Ife is that Ife is seen as the ancestral town of the Yorubas. I'm Yoruba.
Okay.
Yeah. So went to medical school in Ife, where I really discovered my love for writing. So I was smack in the middle of medical school, and then I found out that I wanted to be a writer.
Right.
And I had a bit of conflicts with that, really, because I also found out that I didn't like blood.
No?
Like I was squeamish. I didn't want anybody's blood on me. I didn't want anybody's body fluids of whatever kind. And it was a bit of an existential crisis to find that you know, the field that you're studying in and you'd gone deep into, you didn't want blood. And then I also found out I wanted to be a writer. But I also knew that as much as I wanted to be a writer, I knew that there was also a need for me to also do something else, because I find very carefully that a lot of writers in history has always had to do something else to support themselves. So
right.
You have like a decent plan B. Then I found psychiatry.
Well, there's an awful lot going on there, and there's a lot to unpack. But before we delve into that, and actually that was one of my big questions I wanted to ask, is how you're able to juggle so many different passions and interests and careers basically going on.
Yeah.
But before, I want to go back a little bit further and just share whatever you're comfortable with sharing. What kind of kid were you like? What were you like in school? Were you outgoing? Were you maybe confident? Were you a bit more shy? What was Dami like?
I was also a rebel, actually.
Right,
From
okay.
time, yeah. So my aunt, whose birthday is today actually,
Oh,
pretty much raised me as well. Like when I say raised me, she lived with us and she would take me to like nursery and all of that. And she says to me that since you were like 2, that you would speak your mind, and you speak your mind in such a way that it can be very direct. And she's like 3-year-old saying stuff like this, and I haven't changed much according to her. So I was always this kid who I was always passionate about what I was passionate about. I always was interested in social justice. Like I believe very much that people, should be treated. I believe in things like basic values like respect, which should be reciprocal. Respect a person's sanctity as a human being. It's sacrosanct. You should, always be seen to respect that the person has their rights and that shouldn't be trampled upon. Be kind if you can be generous, and I don't like people being cheated at all. So that was the kind of person I was. But fitting that into what society is, because a lot of times you may have noticed this as well. I mean, that's that a lot of a lot of injustices are permitted in society.
absolutely.
So that meant that I wasn't always in the direction of everyone else.
Interesting. Did you get in trouble a lot as a kid?
As a kid, not really, because I was the first child of 4. First child of 3, and then we had my parents had a child who was significantly younger than us, like maybe up to like 8 to 10 years younger. But I was also seen to be a leader in that sense. So my parents had a lot of expectations of me. So I guess that tempered me a bit. So even if I was going to think about, should I go all out? And then I say, well, no, maybe like drop out of medical school. Like, okay, you have siblings. If you do that, because my immediate brother is a doctor as well. So like, if you do that, how would that impact on your family? How would that impact on things in general? So I guess that always sort of like kept me in check. I had to think that, okay, what are you doing? How will your parents feel about it? How would they look to your siblings? How would they represent your family? So I guess in that way, I've always had to just like pick my battles. But I guess the older I've become, the more outspoken I am, as it were. Like, whilst I was in training in psychiatry in Yaba Neuropsychiatric Hospital, I was an activist. I was general secretary of the Association of Resident Doctors, and what that meant was obviously to confront with the hospital management and the government at large, which was our bigger employer, if you see what I mean. I had to hold my own, stick to my guns. Of course, there were consequences, but we're here.
How do you think you've dealt historically with pressure? Because on one hand, it sounds like you've always had a degree of pressure, but also because you've had a drive, clearly ambitious as well. How do you think you've dealt with the pressures of your life? Obviously, that's a bit of a generalization because there are different challenges. But were you someone who you think were able to deal with pressure quite well, or have you had your moments as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've done like in terms of pressures, and I guess really one of the definitions of mental health that I like, or the idea of good mental health, is that you are able to, in spite of the pressures of life, be productive.
Right.
So I guess if you look at that and you use that definition as a benchmark to analyze my life, you'd see that I've fairly been productive. So I've come out of, I mean, I'm not yet 40 and I've, worked in two continents, published 3 books of poetry, to a bit of critical and some commercial acclaim. So I guess if you look at that, I mean, I've pretty much had, even within the writing career, I've done a lot of music journalism, which is quite good. I'm quite proud of what I've accomplished in the last 10 years, writing journalism about music. I'm doing the poetry and also doing a lot of what I would call education, literary education of, supporting and mentoring people, setting up literary journals here and there. So to that extent, I would say that pressures of life hasn't really pushed me or punished me into being what I'm not. I think I've done everything I hope to have achieved, and I'm still doing things. I'm still working, still writing, still looking after my patients. Still have a lot that I hope to accomplish.
And long may it continue.
Amen.
So when did you first truly discover your love of writing then?
I think I was 11.
11?
Yeah, I think I was 11. At the time, I was reading a lot of books that I found around the house. Just see any book, read it. And then I found that I went through all the books very quickly. And then I began to ask my mom about books. My mom's a teacher. So what she did then was to borrow books from the library for me. So she'd borrow maybe a handful of books for the holidays. And before you know it, I finish all the books. Just read everything. Because there was very little to do. Remember, when I was about the age I was then, you didn't have a phone.
Right.
So
Different times.
There were no cell phones. There was, in Nigeria then, there was very little electricity. I mean, because it was rationed. So, you didn't have like 24 hours light. That's what we call it in Nigeria. So, if you get 8 to 10 hours, you're good.
Right.
So, there wasn't television as such. And even then, the televisions didn't come up until like 4. So 4 p.m. Yeah. So that's when the broadcast till about 12. So, and then obviously you're in bed at 10, at 9. Yeah, on the days that your parents are merciful, 10. So that left you an enormous amount of time to do things. And my parents also were a bit worried about us, just lazing about, just leaving the house and just wandering,
right.
Because we'll be worried about, the kind of harm that you can come to at the time, because it was the 90s in Nigeria. The 90s in Nigeria was badass. It was gangster. Yeah, it was gangster. So the crime rates were very high. There was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of, even infrastructures were done. So it was a difficult period of time at the time. So nobody wanted you to go out. Your parents didn't want you to go out without being accompanied. So what that meant was that we just sat in the house and read. So, and soon enough, I was reading, and then I began to experiment as well, just write a few things. First thing I probably wrote was like an essay. Then I wrote a poem. And then that was it for me. I just wrote that poem, and I was stuck. I knew that was it.
Can you remember what that was like, that first poem you wrote, the feeling it gave you?
Yeah, it was, the first feeling that I had was that of an accomplishment, I guess, of just feeling accomplished and also wanting to show or share that work with others. So I think I showed my siblings, who were, and still my first, they've changed now. My wife is my first reader. Yeah, so used to be my siblings, so I showed them to them, and they were like, "Oh, that's cool." And I showed my mom, and they were like, "Okay, well, that's all right." But I guess no one started to take me seriously until maybe like 4 or 5 years. No, I guess it was. So there was a friend of mine who I shared a poem with him, and then he sent it to a contest.
Oh wow!
Like,
what, without you knowing? Or?
Yeah, he did tell me at the time, So, but then he put my name obviously on it, and then used my school address, and then there was an email from not an email. No, it was a mail, like a mail address to me. Went to the principal's office, and then the principal came and showed me and said, "Well, you I think I was shortlisted for that contest at the time." And I was like, "Oh wow, look at that!" And it's like that, that was it's the kind of thing that people would share. And like, oh, that was when I thought that maybe there's something there.
Of course.
Yeah, so then I began to just pursue that, a bit more relentlessly. Yeah, and here I am now, 3 books in.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, 3 books in. I don't know how much longer have. I mean, how many more books to publish, But yeah, I'm always writing poetry.
And in those early days in particular, what were the main topics you wrote about? Were they at all different, or what was the feeling? What was it that you particularly wanted to write about exactly?
Everything and anything at all. Whatever just moved me. At the time, it was mostly what I was reading. So I was reading a lot of just like stuff that about. I was really particularly moved about Black history, African history, slavery, the idea of it. Colonialism as well, I guess, but not at the level I'm moved about it now, in terms of seeing the ramifications of it. So I was more interested in what it meant to be enslaved, as from a personal narrative or the grief that the person who was enslaved must have felt. So I found myself doing those kinds of monologues at the time. And wrote just a few of those kinds of poems, and people were like asking like, why so morbid? What's wrong with you? I guess it was much later that I realized that I was more interested in mundane things and writing about or celebrating normal life or the idea or the notion of normalcy in life.
What role did your upbringing in Lagos have as well on your work and your life? I'd like to speak about Lagos, please.
Lagos is special, there is a Yoruba saying that Eko baole baole, and that means that Lagos is such a spacious city as to take the thief and the lazy. Yeah, so it's a special city to me because in the city or in the kind of city that Lagos is, and I guess it's a natural attribute of most cities, is that it's first seen as a place of opportunity, and it's seen as a mecca of sort where all walks of people come into, or people from all sorts of realities come into. So it becomes like that pool where when you fish into it, you don't know what comes, and that's really where you as a writer, your imagination goes to flourish. Yeah, that's the first thing. The other thing is that the city itself never sleeps. It's like a city that the soundtrack of it is the movement of people. You see what I mean? So I'm fascinated by that. I mean, and when I was in Lagos, I was a bit of a night crawler, so I used to go out and city at night and see how the city is. So people who work during the day and toil are different from the ecosystem of the nightlife. In the night, you'd see all sorts of human beings, all sorts of people, and I imagine maybe even some extraterrestrial beings also come to the party, as legends will have it. So, and there's music really at night as well. So I was a bit fascinated by all of that. But obviously, this was when I now came into Lagos as an adult. As an adult, but as a child, I was locked out of all of these realities.
Yeah.
So then it was just I spent my entire childhood in traffic, Lagos traffic, because the commute to school was incredible. It was about 1.5 hours sometimes. So I was stuck in the car. My mom would drive us in a Volkswagen B2. The car was reliable, but on its off days, showed us serious pepe, as we say in Nigeria. It gave us a bit of stress as well. So would be in the vehicle, I would pretty much be reading. So at the time, it was just I'd borrow books from anybody who would offer me books. So, but then I was reading mostly the popular stuff, the pop stuff, the James Hadley Chase, Sidney Sheldon, John Grisham, Jeffrey Archer. And then we messed about with a bit of the romance writers like Daniel Steele, Jackie Collins, who was very raunchy. Just read all of these books, borrow the book for 1 or 2 days and then blow through it. So typically my reading was, if I got a book from maybe a classmate at 4 or 3 p.m., I start the book and then read through the day, through the traffic, do your homework at home, then read a bit, at night, but do it in such a way that no one sees you. So sleep at like 1, wake up, and then finish the book and return it the next day. So I guess that was a blessing in disguise, because that long commute time meant that I was able to read a lot.
Right. So blessing in disguise, really, in many ways.
Blessing in disguise.
Now, when we get to this next, I suppose, transitionary phase in your life, so you've made. How did the decision to enter into the world of psychiatry come up? How as a career path? Because this is again the fascinating thing about this is there's so much going on here. You're making this big decision, I suppose, to pursue writing. Your love of poetry and writing. You also want to have a proper career to follow as well, because there's no. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. There's no certainty with writing that you can make a career out of it. So there's so much going on here. But so how does psychiatry first come up?
Yes. So I said earlier that I found out in 400 level that it was 300 level that I did not particularly like blood.
Right.
I didn't like to put my hands in it. I didn't like the smell of it. I didn't like body fluids, and I was training to be a doctor. And then we rotated through psychiatry. And the first thing I noticed about psychiatry was that this was a field of medicine where the ward rounds were done sitting down. And you just talk to the patient, just like we're talking now. That's the way you talk to your patient. Just talk. And it's like, okay, it looks like this is where I need to be. Quickly enough, I found that, this was the field of medicine that I felt most attuned with, because as a psychiatrist, you have to understand, be excited about, be invigorated by, be obsessed with culture, because the culture or a person's culture plays a lot in what you can say or describe as what an illness is or what is not an illness. So, and that's also where the writer is,
right?
Or the creative or the artist, if you like, is in that same place where you're interested in culture, the notion of it, what it is or what it's becoming, if you like. So I found myself in that situation where I was just, I found this field of medicine. Like, okay, it looks like this is where I need to be. Yeah.
But and how was that transition into it then, as a field, as making it your profession? Was that a smooth one, I suppose?
Oh yeah, I guess it was very smooth actually, because once I made that decision that I wanted to become a psychiatrist, I knew I had to finish medical school, because you have to first finish medical school, and in Nigeria after that you do the house job, which is the equivalent of FY1 in the UK, and then you do what's called a youth corps, which is a compulsory 1-year program, which was instituted after the Civil War, the Biafra War in Nigeria, to help to integrate people into society or into Nigeria as a whole. So you're posted from wherever you are to somewhere else to spend 1 year. So it's not just only doctors who do it. Every graduate who is under the age of 30 is made to do that. It's a way of integrating society, I guess.
And so what was that experience like?
It was good. I traveled. I was posted to Anambra State, which is the state or the state of origin of the great Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe. It was indeed, I was in Anambra when he passed away and when he was buried.
Wow.
Yeah, in Ogidi, where his hometown. It was a national affair. It was well celebrated that night. So I experienced. So just to say that Anambra is the home of the Igbos, really. The Igbos are like the dominant ethnic group there.
Right.
I think there's some Igalas upwards, but I wouldn't say I encountered any of them. It was more of Igbo. So it's Igbo speaking Igbo. I had to learn a bit of Igbo as a psychiatrist or as a medical doctor at the time, because just a medical officer. So learn a bit of it so that you can consult your consultation, because a lot of them wouldn't speak English. So yeah, that was that. And then I fell in love with highlife music there. So that was where I began to listen to a lot of the Atlant Igbo highlife music. So first and foremost, I was able to buy the music itself. So buy the Celestine Ukus, the Rex Lawsons, buy the albums, and listen to it. So that was a good time. and enjoy the cuisine as well. The Igbo food is really good food.
Any favorite dishes?
Then at the time I used to go to a place called I used to go to Awka, which is the capital of Anambra, to eat the ogbono. It's like a draw soup made with I don't know, I can't remember what ogbono is in English, but the draw soup was made with okra. And put a lot of fish in it, and you eat that with eba, which is cassava flakes that is made into I don't know how to describe it, but eba and draw soup. Good. Yeah.
Well, now let's start to speak a little bit about your work. So first up, we have Clinical Blues. Is this actually your first officially published collection of poems?
No, it wasn't. It was so I published first Daybreak and Other Poems, which is was like a chapbook.
Okay.
But it was only published electronically at the time, with a generous introduction by Emmanuel Iduma, who was a collaborator. We started a magazine called Saraba together. That was my first work that I pushed out, collection of 14 or 15 poems. I can't remember.
What was that feeling like, getting your first collection actually out there?
It was good. It was nice. It was always nice. I mean, it did quite well as well. Yeah. Daybreak was quite popular in Nigeria. It was well received. Got a lot of endorsement from other writers, other readers as well. And I mean, a lot of people said, "Oh, it looks like we've got the birth of a new poet," that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it was good.
Okay. Well, now moving on to Clinical Blues, though. For those who are not aware, could you maybe give us just a brief introduction to this collection of works? And where were you in life when this first came to fruition?
So I started writing, I think the earliest poems of Clinical Blues was in 2007. 2007, yes. I was in medical school. I was trying to understand what medicine, I was trying to make sense of what I was doing in life. Like,
right.
Why am I here as a doctor? What does this mean? So it was really poems about some sort of coming of age, if you see what I mean. So there was also, as a young man, I was interested in love, the idea or notion of romance. And I was writing some sort of interesting love poems, which was mostly about unrequited love, which I believe I'm an expert at. Even though I'm married now, I don't know what that means. So I was writing those kinds of poems, and I'm also interested in, just nightlife. So I guess those three things were brewing together in what became, you'd say, triangulation, as it were, of romance, medicine or science, and society, as I love to say it, nightlife. Yeah, so that was where the book came from. So I wrote this poem. So the Clinical Blues itself is a very long poem of I think about 10 parts or so. So I wrote about everything, but mostly about things that I was moved by in the hospital at the time.
I want to ask you a little bit about love, though, particularly at this stage in your life. What kind of understanding do you think you had of love at this point in your life? How would you describe it, and has it changed at all since then?
Well, my understanding of the society and the way Nigerian society operated or functioned was that, whilst you were in university, you were expected to, you had some sort of freedom, as it were, in which you then begin to explore the notion of romance, with a view to find a life partner, with a view to hopefully quickly settle down and start a family. I mean, and I have no bones about saying that I've always seen that as normal, as well. Like, I don't think people should be alone. I mean, I grew up in a family where my father and my mother lived together, and in spite of their own differences, they made do and made it work for themselves. So I always wanted that as well. I don't know how much of that was societal. How much of that was implicitly society influencing me, or how much of that was what I wanted myself. But I like the idea of love and the notion of it as well. And I guess unrequited love is a very powerful emotion. You see what I mean? It's the bread and butter of poetry. I mean, even though Reiki says you shouldn't write about love as a young poet, I rebelled against that. I read letters of young poets quite early on, and I thought that, well, why wouldn't you write about love? All poems are sort of love poems in the first instance, as far as I was concerned. It's and one thing that always keeps coming into my poetry is the idea of the notion of affection. Because really, you don't endow things with language, with beautiful language, if you do not have some sort of emotional response to that. So I always just felt that, well, yeah, love was something to think about. Love for the other, for humans, for life, for whatever you're passionate about. Yeah.
And so career-wise, at this point as well, you're continuing to study medicine.
Yeah.
And that's going on. What was that like? What was that experience like?
Oh, well, medical school was quite easy for me, I guess.
Yeah.
It was, because I was doing everything. I was all over the place in school. I wasn't very, very religious at school, so I wasn't really. I mean, like Ife, it's very interesting because Ife is a very religious school. Like, I had in fellowships, like campus fellowships in school, we had almost 100. And just to say this to you, there was an incident that happened in our school whilst I was in Ife, where a small group of fellowship left school during exam period, looking for God in the forest.
Wow.
They were found 7 or so days later. Yeah, with someone who had heard something, felt strongly that Jesus was coming and was going to be in that place, and they were waiting to receive Jesus.
How did that conclude that episode?
Well, they were punished.
Right.
The school punished them for that experience. I just wanted to show you how religious Ife was.
I see.
How religious we were in Ife. I wasn't much of that. I used to go to church. I'd go on Sunday, but I wasn't holding out any fellowship positions. I wasn't fellowship pastor or anything like that. I spent most of my time thinking about writing. So I was reading like a crazy man. That was what was most easy for me to do. I was reading 1 hour a day as a doctor, as a student. So I read 1 hour a day, I think in my preclinic years, so it was divided into, so the first year you do mostly school stuff, what everyone else does. And then the second and third year, you would spend your time doing basic medical sciences like anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. And then the other years, you then go to the clinic where you now then study and go to clinic and then study different aspects of medicine. So in that period, I was mostly, after I read my books, I then would go and go to the female hostel and visit my female friends, many of them at the time, hopefully to score a meal. And then I'll go to New Buka, which was where all the chain of restaurants were. And then boys would sit down, have beer, discuss philosophy, discuss sociology, whatever topic was burning in your mind, discuss music as well. So make a lot of friends, and a few of those friends have stayed to date. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Just out of curiosity, why do you think you maybe weren't as religious? Obviously, you're consumed by writing at this point as well. But why else do you think you maybe weren't as religious as everybody else in the school?
Well, because just generally, like I said earlier to you, I'm a rebel, really, a natural rebel. So when I see that everybody's doing something, I stop
Gravitate.
And I'm like, what's going on here? I found very quickly that I felt that my idea of what Christianity should be. I look at Christianity as a religion, which was quite popular then, and then also Islam was also quite popular, as well then. I saw that people were getting quite radicalized, in school then, in some sort of way, and all of the worship that goes on in the Pentecostal Christianity Nigeria today, we had it then, where a normal fellow student like yourself was exalted and raised as some sort of pastor in church, and then what that meant was people come and wash his clothes, and people would come and cook for him, and then he becomes some sort of god in his own right, and he talks to his class, his roommates as if it's a sort of authority, as it were. I don't like that. I don't care for that in any kind of way. So that was one of the reasons why I just couldn't tolerate what they were doing. I just kept myself to myself.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting insight, actually. So your writing process at this time, what is it like? Do you force yourself to sit down to write, or is it more when you have a feeling or an idea, you then have to rush, or is it a bit of both even? How does it work?
Well, I think different poems arrive in different ways, and that's always been my own understanding of it. But there's such a thing as a poetic aura that I guess most poets are afflicted by. You feel overwhelmed, an overwhelming sense of something. A lot of times you may not even have words to describe it, but you know that there's something inside of you that is brewing, I guess. And a word may come, a phrase may come, a stanza may come. Sometimes the whole poem will just come, and at that point in time, you need to, take it down. So that's really what it was. And a lot of the poems I wrote were written in word rounds or in classrooms, and it's just come to you and then you put it down. And that was mostly what it was for me. I just put it down and put it down and put it down.
And when it came to getting this first collection of works published, in terms of like, obviously to some degree there's going to be some nerves, right? I suppose what is that like, getting something like this published at that time? Were you fearful at all about the response or anything like that? Because it's such a personal thing that I can't even imagine, to be honest, what it's like to publish something like this, of your inner thoughts that you've taken the time to write and put down. What exactly is that like?
Yeah, it was for me, it was always that of joy, really. Because I don't really take myself seriously. I don't even take any. Sometimes I just even have all of these books. So I'm like, I actually wrote these books. Did I? Or did somebody passionate me and do this? So I've never really been someone I have very little expectations of myself, really. My most important expectations of myself is to be a good human being. I want anyone who encounters me, either in my clinic, in my writing, or anywhere at all, to feel that, this is someone who cares about human beings, who cares, who's kind, who's considerate. That's really where, for me, it's what's most important, just being a better person every second. So that's always been what it's been. So with a book like this, and when it was published, it was probably by a small press initially, and this wasn't the original cover. It was a white cover. I don't know if I have a copy of it in here, but I probably will show you. So when it was published, it was a new press. It was well received. It was quite. And some people have described it as the book, that was at the beginning, at the forefront of a new wave of writing in Nigeria. I don't know how much of that is true. How much of that is people saying things to make me feel good about myself?
No, not at all.
So, but then it was different. It was different in the sense that what I was writing was different from what was the tradition at the time. What other people wrote about. People were more interested or excited about writing about politics, and not writing about it. I mean, my books are very political,
of course,
but I'm not overtly writing politics, but people would write about politics. For me, really, is how do you animate suffering without writing from the point of view of the sufferer? That's always been for me the real issue. And the clinical blues was me writing as an observer, just writing these poems about what I was seeing. And for me, the legitimacy of my writing came from my personal perspective. I was more interested in what I was seeing. And I feel that if I'm able to tell you that from my own point of view, you may see it better.
That's a really interesting point, because reading these, I felt like I was kind of almost, you're giving me a hand and pulling me into your thoughts, and that I was kind of walking through these different settings, through these different bars, through these different arenas with you, and you're just speaking to me. You're almost going like, hey, come here, look at this guy, whatever. What made you, do you think you're kind of so personal, I suppose, with your writing, and your freedom to just let your thoughts out there, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's always about vulnerability for me, because I feel that was something that was very missing in a lot of writing I was reading. I mean, read Soyinka, for instance. It's almost like a superhero himself in his writing. It's always here, it's there, it's doing this, doing that. And the question is, how personal, how vulnerable can you be as a person? Really, the vulnerability are the cracks of our humanity. This is at the places where where you can actually feel that, this person actually, he farts, bobs, snores, those are the things. His stomach makes noise sometimes as well. Those kinds of things are where our humanity is first shared. But there are also things that we are very shamed by, and often things that we want to gloss over.
Right.
And that's where me, as a person who's a rebel, goes to. So I'm interested in that, and that's really where I think I take a departure from the other traditions, the other literary traditions that came before. I'm more interested in things that we share, but we'd rather not share. Certainly.
That's really interesting. I'm also interested, you touched on something that I really like. You said you basically don't take yourself too seriously. Personally, going on a bit of a tangent, I think it's quite interesting, because sometimes with poets or actors or artists, especially if they've done quite well, it's quite easy to see them take themselves quite seriously. Sometimes they can get a bit of an ego. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because to an extent you have to take the work seriously, right? Because you have to treat it with respect and like a discipline, but as you said, you don't want to take yourself too seriously. How do you kind of balance that out, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is, the truth is, there's a tyranny of sort of the open page, of the page, of the blank page, which, as a writer, you should respect, really, because you may have written these poems, or these poems may have come through you, and these poems have got some level of acclaim. But every time you go or return to the page, the blank page, you're becoming a writer again. Whatever you've written doesn't really matter anymore. Whatever, you will be judged by the next sentence you come up with, and then we'll put that sentence beside this last sentence that we said you wrote that was great, and ask you if is it still there? Are you still jamming? Sure.
Right.
And I guess that should set everybody alright, really, because you're the poet who wrote Clinical Blues and Affection or whatever. But the next poem you're writing, how does it measure to the other? And if that doesn't scare you, I mean, make you humble, I don't know what else should, or what else can. And I guess that's why I say I don't take myself too seriously, because if you take yourself seriously, I wrote this, I wrote that, and all of this, when you come into the page, you're nobody again. You're actually a nobody, and you're going to have to prove yourself, to yourself on that page. And I guess that's really where it comes from for me as well.
Wow.
And I've seen it happen. I've seen people become a certain kind of way, become inaccessible, really. And I guess that's really what first happens, or what first goes, when you begin to feel that you believe in the hype. You become quite inaccessible to people that will tell you the truth about yourself. And once you erase that close, knit friends, next circle is you surround yourself with psychopaths who just say, "Oh, you're the greatest. Greatest D. Nothing is better than you." Then you get into that habit. You begin to believe your own hype. So, but as a contrarian, normal contrarian, I doubt everything, even my own poetry sometimes.
Wow. Well, moving on to your next book then, I was wondering, could you tell me a little bit about this work, please? A Woman's Body as a Country.
Right. That book, I got into a lot of trouble for that title.
Really? Yeah?
Reckon.
Always a rebel.
Reckon. I was I had a book reading once with a colleague, it's a book club of accomplished women in Nigeria, and they called me since I was a young boy. Like, what do you know about a woman's body? You're this small boy. So it was crazy. The initial title for this book was "The Word According to Affection." That was the initial title, and there's a poem in the book indeed called "The Word According to Affection." But quickly enough, the publisher Lola Shunai, who published this book, and it was first a flagship book in a way as well, which is interesting. This was a flagship book. First was also a flagship book of a poetry series she was starting out. And then said, well, I like the book, but we need to change the title. So we then began to think about titles within the book, which would phrases in the book that would stand out. And then we found the book title, the last poem of the book actually, "A Woman's Body is a Country." Maybe we should call it that. And then we did call it that. And it took off. It took off quite well. It's interesting so far because it's done commercially better than Clinical Blues.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's the title.
Yeah, it's a good title. It's a good title.
I think it's the title. And then the book cover also helps. Victor Kameno, who is a very important Nigerian artist, Nigerian American artist, who was kind enough to let us use Sister Idoto as the cover of the book. It's a beautiful book.
Yes.
I've seen it happen in bookstores where people see the book and like, ooh, I need that book in my life. And you go and look at it and buy it. Yeah. So I guess that's what really made it good. And the poems inside were quite good poems as well. I felt that they were a bit more easy or had a lighter touch than Clinical Blues. And also did not have the anxiety of influences. Because Clinical Blues, I was reading a lot of books, I was mentioning names, dropping names here and there. Right. In Affection, I was more lyrical. Like, A Woman's Body, I was more lyrical, more lyrical poets, there was a lot of music, there's travel, bodies, women's bodies, which is it? Whatever it is. Were there as well, so it was just a nice experience altogether. Putting the book together. And
where were you in your life at this point?
I was in Lagos. I was back in Lagos. Yeah. And I hope the sense of Lagos shows up in the book as well. I was in Lagos. I was a resident, studying to become a psychiatrist. I was also writing about music, so I had like another job, which was writing about music in Nigeria, like writing about Afrobeat. So I was doing all of that at the same time and writing these poems.
So moving on to your third installment of this trio then, Affection and Other Accidents. In some ways, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I found this one of your most vulnerable works out of all three, actually. Mm-hmm. And you give a very in-depth, again, very vulnerable kind of description of this journey, of this long-distance relationship going on, then with everything going on with COVID and the pandemic, but also the isolation that I feel like you're experiencing a lot in this time in your life. Could you maybe give us, for those who aren't aware, and by the way, all the works we're discussing are in the link in the description, so please go and check those out if you want to buy a copy, which I recommend you do. How did this book come into being, and whereabouts in your life again were you when this
so this book came out in 2022, yeah, but I'd say it's a book that crept on me, like I didn't know I was writing a book, and it just so happened that the book, then I just found that I had a book, like an entire manuscript of poems. I think the first thing to say about the book is that it's actually very interesting, a narrative. The entire book itself is a narrative of a relationship that breaks down. Really, that's what it's about. But all of that reflection of that narrative, or reflection that leads to that narrative, happens during COVID, and happens at a time when I was really dislocated. So I'd moved from Lagos to London, and I was, also come to the end of a very romantic relationship that I thought was going to end in marriage. And then I was contemplating all of this, and then there was COVID happening outside. So inside, this man was broken or heartbroken, if you like, and outside, it was COVID. So it was just all of that. I guess that's why the isolation is ramped up in this book.
And were you writing this as it unfolded, these poems?
Yes.
And in many ways, then, is poetry kind of a form of therapy for yourself, would you say?
People said that I was performing therapy in this book on myself.
Right.
And I guess maybe that's a good way to see it, because a lot of the poems and the books was very obsessed with movement. I wrote them when I was maybe going to work, in the bus, on the train, during shifts, So yeah, that's really what it was. And also, I didn't want to write a book. I wanted to write a book that was also in itself a tribute to poetic forms. So I was playing around with forms. So there are a lot of prose poems, there were ghazals, there were pantoums, there was my own take on the haiku. So I was just doing all sort of funny things in the book, I didn't, when I was writing the book, I was just writing. And then one day I looked and I found that I'd written a book. And perhaps of the three books, perhaps it's the most cohesive in terms of if it has like almost a narrative structure. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you think it's, we've already discussed it as kind of a form of therapy, but do you think it also helped you to process maybe any negative emotions you're feeling at the time? Because I'm sort of comparing it to myself. I think what I've learned about myself is when I'm going through maybe tough times, I think I push it down beneath the surface. I think I do it naturally. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I think that's what I do. And then it will come back to you maybe even 6 months later. I'll start having dreams about it or something. But are you able to kind of be very present then, would you say, and process things in actually like a very healthy way, actually?
I don't know if you can say it's healthy, but I can say to you for free that in the first 2 years I lived in the UK, I dreamt every night.
Yeah.
Like I was dreaming, and it was the same dream, same people in my dream. So it was a very traumatic period. I mean, there was no doubt about it that I probably was going through something serious at this time when I was writing this book, and it was the poetry itself, or the language, was the anchor. That I was able to say all of these things out to paper. I mean, meant like I was having a conversation with myself. And I don't really like to read the book as such. And I acquired the painting, but you won't find it in my house. I didn't hang the painting anywhere. Like I gave it as a gift to my brother, just to say, because it was a dark period in my life. And the only reason why I published this book was because I had a friend who was going through the same dark period.
Wow.
It was in a different kind of way. It was also, I said to him that, well, this journey that you're embarking on ends this way. And then I gave him the book to read. And the book sort of like emboldened him to do what he needed to do at the time. So, and when that happened, I was like, okay, well, that's it. That's a good reason to put this book out. So I did then put the book out. And the response has been quite overwhelming, actually. Like, people have their own stories to tell me once they read the book. Like, this happened to me at this time of my life, and this was what happened. And all of that. Yeah, so, yeah. And for me, really, it was important that poetry should have that sort of social function. You need poetry to be a place for people to discuss the adverse experiences sometimes, to find some sort of language to express these experiences, and also to find some sort of hope or redemption, as it were.
How did you find that grit, I suppose, and determination to kind of keep going? Because what would you say your journey like? Was it kind of just smooth sailing in terms of getting your work published and then people like it? And then no, that's what I mean. So
it's never been easy in that sense that like you just So for instance, the first publisher of Clinical Blues, the first book was accepted, signed contracts, did the galley, and then the person was like, "Oh, my business is folding up. I can't publish it." Back on the streets.
There you go.
By the time I published Clinical Blues, I know that the first publishers who said they wanted, or they said that they liked a woman's body, then it was still called The World According to Affection. Also sort of paid lip service, and then 1 minute they were like, and the next minute they were like, oh, we can't do it anymore because it's poetry. Who publishes poetry? Even except you're maybe like an accomplished poet, and it's difficult to push your books out. But unfortunately, this is what I do. I write poetry, so I have to find my way around that. Find my way into getting the books out. But I don't think there's anything in life that doesn't require some sort of struggle. If things come easily to you, maybe you would not value them as you should. So I don't allow that struggle. I'm a Nigerian as well. Nigerians are known to struggle. Struggle and get things done. So I guess that's really what's about for me. It's been that person and also I think I work hard enough on craft. I say hard enough because I know people who are better than me in craft. People who are just naturally more gifted. But I think I do enough so that because Affection, I actually approached a UK publisher and I shortlisted and like, wow, we like this book, but we're looking at our budget spending, we can't do it. But we'll give you a blog if you want to, do something else. So I guess, that means that the work at least is good enough.
Right.
And then you only need a bit of push, here and there to get it out there. It's been quite interesting because of all the books, actually, this is the only one that has actually won something. So Affection was recently named the best collection of the year in Port Harcourt Poetry Festival, and it's just interesting to see that, the book has gotten the attention it requires or it needs. Before that, it was named like the best-selling Nigerian poetry collection. And so these are just the kind of things I was interested in. I want to be read, I think the real nature or the real goal behind publishing is to be read.
Right.
If the publisher wants the book to be read so that they can recoup their money, turn in a profit, the writer wants to be read because they have that burning hunger inside of them to put the book out in the first instance. So that was really what it was for me, to put the book out, to get it read, for the book to mean something to people who read it, And I think all of these goals have been accomplished.
Well, look, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, right? But what would you say your advice is then to, I guess, struggling writers, or for both those who are maybe thinking about starting to write, or those who are struggling to get their work published? I said, I'm assuming you've been asked this a lot, right? But
yeah, but there's a standard answer as well.
Yeah.
Embrace your struggle. Embrace your struggle. The struggle is what it is. Embrace your rejection as well. You will get them. I still get rejections. It's part of it. You get more rejections than acceptances. And nothing illustrates that better than the New Yorker rejection that Gabriel Marquez got before. He won the Nobel Prize next week, but he got a rejection for his story before that. So you get rejections, all right. In fact, if you stop getting rejections, that probably means that people are not reading you for your literary value of the work. They're reading your name to it. So you get that rejection, but do what you care about the most, because things like, the things that you care about, the things that you're passionate about, shines, resonates. If you do stuff that you're not passionate about, people can tell. It's language, isn't it?
Yeah.
If there's anything that human beings have used considerably, it's language. We use language. So when someone is telling a thought here, you can tell when someone's heart or mind or spirit is not in it. They can see, people can tell. So it's, that's what it is. So I feel that's really what's most important for you as a writer, is that you be your true self as much as you can. You don't have to be as vulnerable as I am, or as I want to be, because my vulnerability is a political statement with you. I'm doing it because like, yeah, we'll go deep. We'll go deeper if we can, and I've done that now. So yeah, put your best self there, embrace your struggle, accept your rejections, and do not be afraid to talk about your work. Make it. You're still the best ambassador of your work, and you're probably the biggest champion of your work. I don't shy away from talking about my work. If anyone asks me, "Oh, you want to talk about a clinical business?" Oh, fine, let's go. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So I feel that's very important. I make that my life goal to just continue to talk about my work. Yeah.
Is it the challenge as well between doing it because you really want to do it, that is because you love poetry, also because people who want success? And is that, do you think sometimes what can differentiate those who actually eventually make it is because they're doing it really because they love it and they have a true love for it, and then those can get disheartened because they haven't got the quick success, and it's really because maybe they don't love it as much as they thought they did?
Yeah, so the thing is, if I had not achieved some measure of success as a poet, would I continue to write poetry? Yes.
Right.
So what's the difference? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You see what I mean? So for me, it's not really about. It's always about the fact that you're in this problem already. You're a poet, and no matter how much, I don't want to come to the end of my life and then ask myself that, what would I have done differently? Maybe I should have considered poetry. I'm doing the writing. I'm writing the poems. So that at the end of my life, I'm like, yeah, I wrote the poems. I did. I put it out. And I feel that's really what it's about. Do the things that you love. I write, and I get paid, to write, and I appreciate that. But I do not live off of my writing yet. I work as a doctor as well, to augment my living, to make, and for me it's a practical solution. It works, to be able to get money from this and supplement that with this and all of that. The question is, if I could make my entire living from writing, would I do it? The answer is no. I love to be a doctor as well. I love being a psychiatrist. I contribute immensely, meaningfully to society, to my patients, by looking after them. I enjoy it. It gives me joy. It gives me satisfaction. So I want to be both. I want to be both the writer and I want to be the doctor as well. And I guess once I got my mind out of all of that, I was very clear that, okay, this is the way to go. We have to find some sort of way to make it both work for each other. So I do my doctoring during the week. I write on the weekends. Yeah. What
is one book or books that you've read when you were younger that maybe had the greatest impact on you?
Okay, I think the book hasn't changed. It's still West African Verse, which was is an anthology of poetry, published or written or edited by Donato Sunwoga, who Shimasini wrote a poem about. So that's nice. I think the single most important book that I've read as a young person that sort of influenced, well, first my understanding of what view of the possibilities and practicalities of African poetry, and then sort of set me on this path. It's difficult, but interesting path. I wanted to become a poet. I haven't read West African Verse in a while now. These days I read more of Poems of Black Africa by Wale Soyinka, which is edited. It's an anthology as well, which sort of tries. Anthologies are very difficult things to do, but they're very important for, the entry points for younger writers to sort of make a sense of what tradition has come before. Yes, and I haven't done any anthology myself. I don't hope to, because it's very hard work. But I think they're very important ways of, getting your feet into the water, if you see what I mean.
What was your biggest fear when you were younger?
I think I had fear of arson. Like, we're not arson, we're just of houses getting burnt down. or just invasions, if you like, because when we were growing up, there was a lot of the crime rate, like I said, was very high in Nigeria at the time, and armed robbery was a thing. It was quite popular, and there was a lot of jungle justice that was associated with it, because a lot of times when armed robbers then come and rob people, if they were caught, for instance, then they were jungle justice was applied immediately to them. And seeing that as a child, it dehumanizes you a bit as well. I mean, it dehumanizes the person whose crime was to, rob people. I mean, I'm not sure now, but the consequence of armed robbery in Nigeria is still, capital punishment. But it's not often not signed off by the government. So you're condemned to die, but nothing like that happens. But I guess I was very worried about that, and that sense of invasion is still something that I feel like I'm still very worried about. Like maybe a house getting burnt down, or armed robbery. That was always there.
What do you think that did to you as a young man? Then I suppose. Do you think it adds a level of paranoia to you, or?
Yoruba. I mean, the Yoruba culture and Yoruba sensibility and worldview is quite paranoid. There's always a sense of the order the Yorubas have a saying, which I think it's probably the best way to describe it. And I'll say it in Yoruba and interpret it for you. Enkule lotawa inule lasheningbe. The enemy is in the backyard, but the perpetrator of evil lives inside the house. That's a Yoruba worldview. That's the way they see the world. So paranoia is part of, it's like the bread and butter of our culture. And you find it everywhere. You find it in music, both old and new. You find it in the pithy sayings. And I guess I come from that kind of culture where oftentimes you almost always feel that there's a sense of another malicious order who is trying to, or malevolent spirits, if you like, just roaming around. Yeah.
What is your biggest fear today?
Today? What's my biggest fear today? I think most of my fears, really, I'm always worried about, companionship around. And I guess it was always there, even in the poetry. I never knew. Like, it was much later when I then got to that age where you're no longer a distinguished bachelor. You're no longer a distinguished bachelor, and people are looking at you like, what's wrong with this one? I'm not getting married. And that was when I began to then read my poetry and like, oh bro, like this has always been part of it's been in your consciousness really. And it was something I was always worried about, but I didn't quite know that I was worried about it. And so I had a bit of worries about that as well. And it sort of like filtered into, and also because I write about what I feel deeply about, or fear, I think it came in alive in the poetry. But I guess that was something I was quite worried about. But are you going to be alone for the rest of your life? Are you going to be by yourself? And I guess what made that even more acutely felt, or accentuated if you like, was living Nigeria, living Lagos. I built a community of friends, people that I loved and cared about. And all of that was, I was disrupted or removed from all of that. So I was worried about it.
It's an interesting one. I feel like that's a worry that a lot of people in my generation feel like because sometimes I think this gets over exaggerated, but there seems to be a lot of loneliness. Actually, not just in my generation, maybe just in this day and age, actually, in general. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I was reading recently that, it's one of the main global health concerns, loneliness. Yeah, I think human beings, we're not socialized, or maybe made as it were, to be alone. It's not in the order of things. Because when you're alone and by yourself and you're sensually deprived, then you begin to hallucinate and all sorts of things, I mean, and that's just from my own experience as a psychiatrist, what you've read and what you've observed as well. The chemicals in your brain change, you become depressed, you become less and less. I mean, they use language less as well, because silence becomes the order of the day for you as well. We are not made for that. We're made to use this language to express ourselves, to share. You see what I mean? So I guess for me, it's just a legitimate worry or concern. And you get to a certain age where you get used to being by yourself. And then are you then able to tolerate the presence of others in your space, in your life? And I guess that's really one of the worries I'd always dealt with, yeah.
That could really be a podcast in itself, and that would be definitely an interesting one to ask you more about psychiatry as well.
Yes, I mean, it's language, isn't it? We're talking about stuff and sharing experiences and trying to figure out things together, really. Touching and groping around as we go, hoping to at least find some sort of essence. Yeah, and lesson. It's really been enlightening as well, listening to myself figure out things that, some of the questions have taken me aback.
What is one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
Trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. And it's been very interesting because most of the things I've been worried about, most of the things I felt a certain way about, have come to be true. And you find that if you trust that instinct, you may save yourself a few years, a few minutes, a few months. Yeah, I feel very much strongly that I would have loved to trust my instincts a bit more. Yeah.
Finally, what is one piece of advice you'd give to young people today, but maybe more specifically, young people who are trying to kind of find their path, as it were? Not that there is just one path, one correct way of doing things, but what is one piece of advice you'd give?
In anything you do, be the best that you can be at it. That's the first thing. Because even though we're in a world of comparison and competition, so when four people come together, man, we love it really. Gladiators in the Roman age, but now we're reality TV. You bring all the talents together and say, well, this talent would sell and all of that. But eventually you find, if you look at the journeys of all of the longitudinally, the journeys of people who show up in talent shows, some of them don't make it. Some other people who were shortlisted may be the one who would then become the best. But even in the literary world, a lot of people win big awards early on in their careers, and that's the end of their writing. They never produce anything. Why I'm saying all of this is because I feel I'm very much strongly about this, that it's not really about what people say about your work. It's what you feel about your work that matters the most, and that should be what drives you. If people say you're not good at it, then go get good at it. If you care about it enough, you invest the 10,000 hours you need. And that's really for me. Just be the best at what you are, and I see what comes.
And on that note, Dami Ajayi, thank you so much for your time. This has been so enlightening. Please go and check the link in the description to all of the works mentioned today and much more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. All good.
Yeah, great. Fantastic.